Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Claire Broughton, and today I'll be discussing with you Chapter 6 on Psychological and Psychiatric Foundations of Criminal Behavior. So first, we need to know the following concepts. Forensic psychology or criminal psychology is the application of psychology to questions and issues relating to law and the legal system. Forensic psychiatry is a medical subspecialty applying psychiatry to the needs of crime prevention and solution, criminal rehabilitation, and issues of criminal law. This figure 6-1 shows the assumptions of psychological and psychiatric theories of crime causation. Some examples are, first, the individual is the primary unit of analysis. Second, personality is the major motivational element within individuals because it is the source of motives and the seat of drives. So I'll leave you to read this slide on your own. So let's look at the history of psychological theories. Key ideas characterizing early psychological theories are personality, such as Freud, for example, and Freud's theory. And then you also have behaviorism or behavioral conditioning, which was popularized by Pavlov. You also have psychoanalytic theory, which is an outgrowth of personality theory. Personality disturbances. Psychopathology is any psychological disorder that causes distress for an individual or for those in the individual's life. This would be a result of mental disease, and it includes schizophrenia, ADHD, alcoholism, and bulimia. Psychopathy is a specific and distinctive type of psychopathology. The psychopath. Psychopathy is a personality disorder characterized by antisocial behavior and lack of sympathy, empathy, and embarrassment. Cleckie developed the concept of a psychopathic personality. He said that the psychopath is a moral idiot, and the key distinguishing characteristic of a psychopath is poverty of affect, or the inability to accurately imagine how others think and feel. So simply put, this is a lack of empathy towards others. Figure 6-2 shows us selected characteristics of the psychopathic personality: superficial charm and good intelligence, absence of delusions, hallucinations, or other signs of psychosis, absence of nervousness or psychoneurotic manifestations, inability to feel guilt or shame, unreliability, chronic lying, ongoing antisocial behavior, poor judgment and inability to learn from experience, an impersonal, trivial, and poorly integrated sex life, unresponsiveness in general interpersonal relations, failure to follow any life plan, and self-centeredness and incapacity to love. This slide shows us the type of psychopaths. First, the primary psychopaths. These are born with psychopathic personalities. Secondary psychopaths or sociopaths are born with normal personality but develop psychopathic tendencies as a result of experiences, for example, childhood abuse. Charismatic psychopaths are charming, attractive, and habitual liars. Distempered psychopaths are easily offended and fly into rages. The psychopathy checklist, or PCL, is one measure by psychologists of how to determine psychopathy. Recent research suggests psychopaths know the difference between right and wrong. A recent study of our adolescent psychopaths found intensive treatment was linked to reduced violent recidivism. So what exactly is an antisocial or asocial personality? One is said to have an antisocial personality if he or she is unsocialized and their behavior pattern brings them into repeated conflicts with society. Individuals who exhibit an antisocial personality are said to be suffering from antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD. Incidence of ASPD is much higher among male prisoners than in the general population. The causes of ASPD is unclear. Somatogenic causes are based on physiological features, and psychogenic causes are rooted in early interpersonal experiences. For example, childhood abuse, childhood neglect, or childhood victimization. A small proportion of those with ASPD are women. Females with ASPD appear to have many of the same characteristics as males. They assume antisocial roles at similarly early ages. The trait theory is another theory that explains why criminals offend based on psychology. ASIC explained crime as a result of fundamental personality traits or characteristics. There are three categories: introversion, extraversion, neuroticism, or emotional stability, and psychoticism. According to this theory, those who are extroverts, high in neuroticism, and psychoticism are more likely to offend. The trait theory explains that personality is stable throughout life and largely determined by genetics. Psychoticism is closely related with criminality. Modern trait theories have expanded to include 5 basic traits. These basic 5 traits are strongly and genetically influenced, and they appear to be universally shared by all peoples. Figure 6-3 shows us the big 5 personality dimensions. These are stable, agreeable, open, extroverted, and conscientious. Now let's look at post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD is a serious condition that can develop in individuals who have undergone or witnessed traumatic and terrifying experiences. This is a psychological disorder characterized by anxiety, and it can involve physical symptoms. In contrast to PTSD, acute stress disorder, or ASD, is normal anxiety experienced following dangerous or scary events. Few people with PTSD became violent, and those who do may have had a propensity for antisocial behavior. Postpartum depression, or PPD, is a mood disorder characterized largely by moderate to severe depression. 10 to 22% of women experience postpartum depression after giving birth. It may occur soon after delivery or up to a year later. Occasionally used as a defense against criminal charges. Postpartum psychosis is a much more rare disorder. This was a mental illness experienced by Andrea Yates when she drowned her children after her husband left their house. Cognitive theories of crime, or learning theories, examine the thought processes. They try to learn or explain how people learn to solve problems, perceive and interpret the social environment. The next theory of psychology to explain criminal activity is the modern moral development theory. According to this theory, individuals become criminal when they do not successfully complete their intellectual development from childhood to adulthood. Piaget postulated that children go through developmental stages, moving from moral absolutism to moral relativism. Kohlberg proposed a six-stage cognitive structural theory of morality. He explained that people who have evolved to higher stages of moral reasoning are unlikely to commit crime. He also explained that there's a preference for higher levels of moral thinking, which is universal in humans. Research shows offenders have less ability in making moral judgments. Figure 6-4 shows Kohlberg's 6 stages of moral development. The first stage is when rules are seen as absolute and fixed. People blindly obey the law, and punishment are important principles. Second stage, self-interest is primary, and negotiation develops. Third stage, the importance of behavioral standards is understood. Fourth, rule following is viewed as a social duty. Fifth, the relativity of law is understood, accepts a social contract with others. And sixth, abstract reasoning leads to universal principles and empathy for others. So the sixth stage of development, abstract reasoning, which leads to universal principles and empathy for others, is the best and the highest stage of moral development that leads one to obey laws because of a sense of duty and empathy, a sense of fairness, and acknowledgement that it is only just and right to follow the law. Cognitive information processing theory. This is the study of human perceptions, information processing, and decision making. This states that violent individuals may be using information incorrectly when making decisions. Because of how they process information, some people are unable to recognize the harm they are doing to others. Cognitive dissonance is another concept in psychology. This states that stressful mental state arises in an individual who holds multiple contradictory ideas, values, or beliefs at the same time. It may occur in people who are forced to act in a way that contradicts their ideas, values, or beliefs. Now, script theory is another explanation for crime, and here, script refers to the generalized knowledge about specific types of situations that is stored in the mind. People use scripts in everyday life to guide behavior, to anticipate an appropriate sequence of events in a given context. For example, when you go to the restaurant, you have a script in mind. You go to the host or hostess, you expect that person to find you a seat and seat you and your companions. Then you expect the waiter to come and give you a menu. And then you expect to order food. And then you expect the food to be delivered to you. So that's a script when you go to a restaurant. Now, career offenders develop scripts to guide them through criminal activity. Criminal scripts help form criminal identity. The criminal mindset. Criminals make different assumptions about living and behaving than non-criminals. Criminal personality develops early in adulthood, and it includes ways of thinking characteristic of many types of criminals, but not shared by non-criminals. Almost all criminals are alike in how they think. To rehabilitate offenders, must first change their thoughts and lead them to reassess their worldview. The psychoanalytic perspective, criminal behavior as maladaptation. Psychiatric criminology envisions a complex set of drives and motives that operate from within the personality to determine behavior. It focuses on the individual as a unit of analysis. A primary theorist is Sigmund Freud, who came up with the idea of psychoanalysis. Freud stated that psychoanalysis sees criminal behavior as maladaptive, the product of inadequacies in the offender's personality. Freud coined these concepts of id, ego, and superego. The id is based on the pleasure principle, the ego based on the reality principle, and the superego is based on the ethical principle. For example, the id wants you to be wealthy and achieve wealth. The ego, based on this goal, would determine possible courses of outcome or decisions or pathways in order to achieve wealth. Some of these pathways would involve criminal activity, and some would involve conforming or normal behavior, such as getting a job. Now, the superego would, if it's fully developed, would sort out among the alternatives proposed by the ego to tell the id which is ethical, which is moral, which is legal. Freud stated that the personality is made up of three components. The id contains motivation for criminal behavior, and other controlling aspects such as the superego keep it in check. Individuals may be led into crime because of a poorly developed superego. Freud also stated that the behavior of violent offenders are dominated by the id, which makes them unable to control impulsive and pleasure-seeking drives. On the other hand, through repression, individuals may seek to reject their own desires and impulses toward fulfilling the id by removing them from their awareness, making them unconscious of those repressed desires. Repressed needs provide another path to criminality. For example, many criminals have a secret need to be punished arising from a sense of guilt. Now let's focus on the psychotic offender. Psychosis is a mental illness characterized by a lack of contact with reality. Characteristics of psychotic individuals include grossly distorted conception of reality, inappropriate moods and mood swings, marked inefficiency in getting along with others and caring for oneself. Not all psychotic persons commit crimes. Now, frustration aggression theory. Freud saw aggression as a natural response to frustration and limitations. Frustration aggression theory explains that direct aggression towards others is the most likely consequence of frustration. Aggression can be manifested in socially acceptable ways or engaged in vicariously. The concept of displacement explains that violence is vented in someone or something that is not the source of the original frustration. Crime has also been seen as a mode of adaptation to life stresses. There are two forms of adaptation. First, alloplastic adaptation. So crime reduces stress by producing changes in the environment. And autoplastic adaptation. Crime reduces stresses as a result of internal changes in beliefs and value systems. An example of alloplastic adaptation is when a kid who experiences bullying in the playground for several instances and like a longer period of time, resorts to crime by assaulting the people who have bullied him. Autoplastic adaptation, an example, is when one changes his internal belief systems and rationalizes his behavior in order to commit crime. Crime is also the result of criminogenic needs. So what are these criminogenic needs? They're dynamic attributes or risk factors of offenders and their circumstances associated with rates of recidivism. An example of a risk factor is prior criminal history. Because they are amenable to change, they can be targeted by treatment strategies intended to reduce criminality and recidivism. Not all risk factors are criminogenic needs. Some are static elements not amenable to change. Attachment theory explains criminality in terms of the lack of secure attachment developed early in life to parental figures. It explains that healthy personality development requires a child to have a close, continuous relationship with the mother. There are three forms of attachment. First, secure attachment, which is the healthy form. Second, anxious avoidance attachment. Third, anxious resistant attachment. Delinquent behavior arises when non-secure attachments are created. For example, anxious avoidant attachment or anxious resistant attachment. Difficulties in childhood appear to produce criminality later in life. Children raised in insecure environments are likely to engage in violent behavior as adults. Childhood insecurity leads to relative lack of empathy. Behavior theory. Ivan Pavlov indicated that behavior can be conditioned or shaped. Okay? His experiment with the dog is a classic sample of behavioral conditioning. So before conditioning, he would feed the dog, he would show the dog food, and the dog would salivate. Separately, he would sound the tuning fork, and the dog would not salivate. So during conditioning, what he did was when he would serve the food, he would also sound the fork, and the dog would salivate. And after conditioning, by merely sounding the tuning fork, the dog would salivate. So here he showed that operant conditioning, like the behavior of someone could be conditioned or changed by changing the environment. Okay, so operant behavior explains that behavior choices operate on the surrounding environment to produce consequences. How do you do this? How do you condition individuals? Well, through the use of rewards and punishments. Rewards increase the frequency of good behavior, and punishments decrease the frequency of bad behavior. There are two types of punishment and two types of rewards. Positive reward increase the frequency of good behavior by adding something desirable to the situation. For example, giving a child a toy. A negative reward increases good behavior by removing something distressful. For example, rewarding a child by allowing the child to skip morning chores. A positive punishment, on the other hand, decreases bad behavior by adding something undesirable. For example, spanking a child. A negative punishment decreases bad behavior by removing something desirable. For example, taking away toy or candy. So behavior is shaped through the application of rewards and punishments. Pavlov showed that behavior can be conditioned to respond to situations with either pro-social or anti-social behavior. Crime can be explained as a result of inappropriate behavioral conditioning. Another theory in psychology to explain crime is the role of modeling. Gabriel Tarde came up with 3 laws of imitation. He said that people in close contact tend to imitate each other's behavior. So for example, close friends tend to mimic or model each other's behavior. Second law, imitation moves from top down. For example, the younger generation imitates the older generation. Followers imitate superiors. Third, new acts and behaviors either reinforce or replace old ones. For example, new technology replaces older technology. Bandura also came up with the social cognition theory of aggression. He conducted an experiment wherein he let children observe adult role models striking inflatable cartoon characters. So the kids whose parents or adult models were striking the inflatable balloon characters, cartoon characters, similarly strike or hit the balloons. Children whose parents or adult role models did not strike the balloon also did not strike the balloon. Based on this experiment, he said that people learn how to act by observing others. He also said that everyone is capable of aggression, but must learn how to behave aggressively. Three concepts are central to his social cognition theory. First, observation. Second, imitation. And third, modeling. So aggression can be provoked through assaults, verbal threats, thwarting hopes, and obstructing goals. People may also become aggressive because they are rewarded for it. An example would be the reduction of aversive treatment. A person, for example, who becomes violent because of past aggressive behavior against him is immediately rewarded by the cessation or by the stopping of negative treatment. On the other hand, disengagement allows people who devalue aggression to engage in it. So it's a form of neutralization. What are the policy and treatment implications of psychological theories? First, correctional psychology. This is concerned with the diagnosis and classification, treatment, and rehabilitation of offenders. Some of the most successful treatments emphasize changing offender personality characteristics, such as impulsivity. Another treatment implication is cognitive behavioral intervention. So through this program, offenders are made to acquire better social skills to become more pro-social. Offenders are also taught to modify their cognitive processes to control themselves and interact positively with others. This intervention targets offenders' environment, behavioral responses, and skill development. It also increases reasoning skills, problem-solving skills, and expands empathy. Now, assessing dangerousness is also one component in the criminal justice system. Selective incapacitation is based on the notion of career criminality and the need to protect society by incarcerating the most dangerous individuals. Corrections officials and psychologists have used psychological techniques to identify future offenders and those likely to reoffend. This strategy depends on accurately identifying potentially dangerous offenders. The central focus of correctional psychology has been developing empirically based risk assessment and classification tools. Research suggests that the idea that criminal risk can be predicted in most cases is not evidence-based. Assessing dangerousness is a central issue in criminology. Predicting criminality. Recent study found a strong relationship between childhood behavioral difficulties and later problem behavior. For example, childhood abuse leads to adult aggressive tendencies or aggressive behavior during adulthood or teens. Prediction requires more than generalities. There's a difference between predicting a percentage of people in the population who will be criminals and predicting which individuals will violate the law. What are some critiques of psychological and psychiatric theories of crime? These theories fail to consider social or environmental conditions that produce crime. The idea of moral reasoning sense puts locus of control within the individual. However, physical and social barriers to crime may be more effective than a sense of moral right or wrong. Individual theories have also been criticized on various levels. Freudian theory lacks scientific support. Psychiatric theories are appropriate for explaining abnormal cognition, but they do not apply well to otherwise normal people who turn to crime. Behavior theory ignores the role cognition plays in human behavior. Modeling theory lacks comprehensive explanatory power. Now let's take a look at criminal psychological profiling. Psychological profiling assists police investigators. It's based on the idea that behavioral clues left at the crime scene may reflect the offender's personality. It's most useful in repetitive crimes and hostage negotiations. Critics, however, view it more as an art than a science. And some psychologists discount the value of profiling. Now, what is psychological autopsy? It is a formal investigation in the cause of death by focusing on what the person thought, felt, and did before death. Particular focus is on identifying patterns consistent with personality disorders or mental illness. May help determine why a particular mode of death resulted and help identify contributing factors. Now let's look at insanity and the law. Insanity is a legal concept and not a clinical or medical determination. It refers to the type of defense allowed in criminal courts. There are several ways by which you can determine or plead insanity. First, through the McNaughton rule, which is the standard used in Texas for judging legal insanity. But the McNaughton rule requires that the offender show that because of a mental illness, he cannot be held criminally responsible because at the time of the actions, he did not know what he was doing, or he did not know that what he was doing was wrong. Another test to determine insanity is the irresistible impulse test. Here, the defendant is not guilty if, by virtue of his mental state, he or she was unable to resist committing the action. Although Texas used the McNaughton rule, other states use both the McNaughton rule and the irresistible impulse test. Guilty but mentally ill. A person can be held responsible for a criminal act even though a degree of mental incompetence is present. The requirements for GBMI verdict is that all the required statutory elements are proven. The defendant is found mentally ill at the time of the crime, but not found legally insane at the time of the crime. So you can get a verdict of guilty but mentally ill if you have a mental illness, but you're not able to prove the McNaughton test or the irresistible impulse test. If a GBMI verdict is returned, the judge may impose any sentence possible under the law for the crime in question. The offender is sent to psychiatric hospital for treatment and transferred to prison after declared to be cured. What are the problems with the insanity defense? It must be brought before court and proven by the defense. It is rarely used and rarely successful. A defendant found not guilty by reason of insanity is likely to spend a long time in court-ordered institutional psychiatric treatment. Critics question whether the idea of mental illness or insanity is useful in the study of criminology. And that brings an end to my lecture today. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.